Hi guys, it's Cheyenne. Today I'm simply going to be reading you a short story from the novel The Gargoyle by Andrew Davidson. Now this story I read a few years ago, but I've kept it because it is a memorizing experience of finding yourself, religion, and the concepts of culture. Let's start reading. If there was one thing that Grazina knew for certain, it was that her beloved Francesco was a good man. He was a blacksmith in their hometown of Firenze, and he toiled at his craft, always trying to forge a better horseshoe or a stronger sword. Sometimes he lost track of the hours and stopped only when Grazina appeared in the door of his shop and suggested that he pay a little less attention to his fire and more attention to his wife. She joked that he must have done something very bad in his past life to be preparing so diligently for hell. He would laugh, promising to come right away, and Grazina would laugh too. She knew that hell was the last place her husband would end up. Francesco would never be known as the finest sword maker in all of Italy or the great metal worker of Firenze, but this didn't matter to him. He wanted to be a good tradesman, a dependable blacksmith with honest prices, but his real desire was to be a great husband. He crafted beautiful gifts for Grazina in his metal shop, candle holders, cutlery, and the most wondrous jewelry. He always claimed that his greatest achievements as a metalworker were the wedding rings that he forged for himself and Grazina. In one room of their home, there was a collection of metal toys for the baby they were attempting to conceive. He dreamed of one day that he would be the loving father of her children. No great beauty, this Francesco Crisellini, but then again, neither was his wife. He was a little too hairy for some women, and his steely arms extended from a body built on too much pasta and beer. Grazina would call him La Orzaccio Otto, the bear, and poke his stomach, and Francesco would respond, "I have earned this. It is to relax muscle." Grazina had thick hair and dark eyes, but the rest of her was undistinguished. Still, when Francesco told her she was the most beautiful woman in all of Italy, he believed it. They had been childhood sweethearts, and there was rarely a day that he did not thank God for having her in his life. They were happy. She was kind, he was devoted. Need more be said? Unfortunately, yes. The year was 1347, and a new disease had just arrived from China. The most horrible disease that anyone has ever seen. It swept outward from the ports into the cities and the Italian countryside, killing people as the forest fire destroys trees. In towns, church bells rang constantly because it was believed that the sound would drive out the illness. Many people thought that the smell of the dead carried the disease, so they walked about with scented handkerchiefs over their faces. Incense burned everywhere, mingling with the stench of death. And one day, Grazina felt a fever in the afternoon. She retired to her bedroom for a nap. When she woke up that evening, she discovered a boil the size of an egg on her groin, and swelling under her armpits. She knew that the Black Death was upon her. In the kitchen, Francesco was preparing food. She yelled at him to leave immediately because she had the illness. "Gavaccio olli!" she yelled. "Bubbles." She demanded that he save himself because everyone knew that there was no cure, no help, no hope. She implored, "Leave! Leave now!" There was a stillness in the kitchen. Grazina lay in her bed, listening to the silence that covered the distance between her and her husband. Then she heard him begin to clank the pots and pans to cover the sound of his crying. This continued for some minutes. Then Francesco's footsteps came down the hall towards her. She yelled and cursed and insisted that he stay away, but he appeared in the doorway with a tray of pasta and some wine. "You will feel better if you eat, even just a little," Francesco said. He entered the room, put the tray down, and sat beside her, and then he moved to kiss her. Grazina tried to pull away. It was the first and only time in her life she attempted to refuse him, but Francesco used his blacksmith's strength and forced himself upon her and kissed all of her protest back into her mouth. After a few seconds, she realized it was useless to fight, and she accepted him. It was done. They ate a little that night and lay down. Through the window, the full moon looked in on them. "La luna è tenera," Francesco said. "The moon is tender." He closed his eyes and held her tighter. The last thing Rosina saw that night was his sleeping face. When she awoke the next morning, his face was the first thing she saw in the new day. She had a terrible fever, sheena sweat upon her, and a galloping pulse. "Look," he said gently. "The dark spots have gone to your skin." Rosina began to weep, but Francesco smiled and stroked her hair. "Don't cry. We don't have time for tears. Let us love while we still can." That very afternoon, Rosina fell into the worst of it. For 3 days they lay together. For 3 days, Rosina went about dying horrendously in his arms, while he told her stories about swans and miracles and great loves. On the third midnight of her illness, Francesco awoke to her tortured breathing. She turned her face to his. "This is it," he said. "I will see you soon." Francesco kissed Rosina one final time, taking her final breath deep into his chest. "Ti amo," she said. "I love you." After she passed, Francesco slipped the wedding ring from her finger. He too was now deeply ill, but he pulled himself out of bed. He could barely stand, crippled by the nausea and fever, but he forced himself into his blacksmith shop. There was one thing left to do. He lit the fire and heated the forge. He melted both wedding rings, his and hers, and poured them into the arrowhead mold. When the arrowhead was complete, he set it onto a shaft. He looked down the length of the arrow, ensuring it was as straight and true as any he had ever made. Francesco pulled down the crossbow that was pinned to his wall. It had belonged to his father, a great archer who had been killed in battle when Francesco and his brother Bernardo were still babies. This crossbow, which had been returned to Firenze by the fellow warrior, was the only possession of his father's that Francesco had owned. Beyond this one thing, he did not even have memories of the man. He returned to the bedroom, to Rosina's body. He reached through the open window and placed the arrow and crossbow aside. It was now dawn, and called out to a passing boy so that he could send a message to his brother, who lived in another part of town. Within the hour, Bernardo was standing outside of the bedroom window. Francesco implored his brother to come no closer, for fear that he'd pass on the disease. Francesco asked one final favor. "Anything," Bernardo said. "I will honor your final request." After Francesco made his appeal, he sat on the bed, facing the window. Between heaving sobs, Bernardo lifted the crossbow and put the arrow into place. He took a deep breath, braced his body, and asked the spirit of his father to guide the arrow to its target. Bernardo released the string and let the arrow fly. The shot was precise and death was instant. Francesco fell backwards into the bed beside his Rosina, with the arrowhead made of their wedding rings lodged solidly in his heart. He died as he lived, in love. And that is one of the two stories that is in the book. Now, I believe that short story even has its own meaning. You can figure that out for yourself. Have a nice day.